here we're going to look at three different types of multimeters you're commonly going to use in the shop. You've got a clamp on, primarily used for amp readings. You've got an auto ranging, and you've got a manual ranging digital multimeter. Like I said, the clamp meter, this is good for reading high amp loads, but it's also capable of reading resistance, voltage, hertz, and temperature. This auto ranging, this will do AC DC volts, resistance, diode check, and up to 10 amp loads, AC and DC. This manual ranging multimeter, this will do AC and DC volts again, only DC amps, as well as resistance. No matter which multimeter you choose, standard, they're going to come with a set of probes as well. These probes, they're good for most applications, but there are some other accessories that are good to have that'll make your multimeter even more useful. Most important is have an extra set of probes. You have one fail, you can always plug another set in. I like to carry a set of bare cables as well, and these cables match up to some Alligator clamps. These are great when you're working with voltage. You need your hands free, and you need to be able to measure it, if you're working alone. These are small clips. These are great for clipping onto terminals or small wires. Allows you to keep your hands free and allows you to be a little bit more safe. Also, very fine probes. These are great for probing the backs of plugs or on circuit boards. A few words on safety. Always be safe. Having both your hands free is important. That's where Alligator clips will come in. Always read your manuals that come with the multimeter. Use common sense. If you don't know how to do something, research how to do it or ask someone that does. Alright, now we're going to look at testing voltage, AC and DC volts. It's probably the most common thing you're going to do with your multimeter, so let's take a look. So first we're going to look at the auto ranging on AC volts. Alright, so auto ranges, you can see 120.6-ish volts. So one reason to have an extra set of probes. The probes that came with this multimeter are actually too thick to fit into an outlet. So I bought the extra set, and those allow me to probe into outlets just fine. So that's auto ranging. It's pretty straightforward. Now let's take a look at the manual ranging. There's two settings. There's 200 volts and 600 volts AC. You always want to be on the smallest scale you can to get the most accuracy. So I'm going to switch these probes over to this meter. We're going to turn it to 200 volts since we're testing 120 volt. Now, even these are almost too thick sometimes. So here we can see 119.6-ish. So you can see there's about a 1 volt difference between meters. It's probably just a half a volt difference. One reads a little high, one reads a little low. Now, if we turn the scale to 600, let's take a look, see what happens. So you can see, I just see 119. I don't have the decimal place there. That's what the scale is going to get you. All right. So now let's look at DC volts. So we're going to just use this battery here. For DC volts, you can see we have 2 volts, 20 volts, 200, and 600. Oh, and 200 millivolts. Since we're testing a 12 volt battery, we'd want to be on the 20 volt. And we have 12.89 volts, 12.9. Now here I can also tell I had my polarity wrong because it's reading negative. Let's get that so you can see it. If I flip my leads around, there, 12.89 volts. For the manual ranging, you can run into a situation if you don't know what your scale should be. Let's just say we don't know what the voltage of this battery is. If you have the scale set too low, so say 2 volts, and you check it, it's just going to read 1 on this particular meter. So in that case, if you don't know your scale, you can start at the highest. Alright, so now I see I have 12 volts there. So now I'll turn it down to the smallest scale that'll read that. There we go, 12.89 volts. Now let's do that same check with the auto ranging. Now, since it's auto ranging, I don't have to worry about my scale. It'll scale automatically. 12.9 volts. Again, leads are backwards. So you see negative 12.9. Flip it around. There we go, 12.9. The next most common task you're probably going to be using your multimeter for is checking resistance. Now, my auto ranging, there's only one setting for resistance, or one notch for measuring it. And it'll auto range appropriately. So let's try measuring a couple here. I've got some sample resistors that we're going to use. I like using clamp meters on something like this because your body will actually measure resistance. So here you can see I've got 2.3 million ohms of resistance through my body. So to prevent touching anything, we're going to use the clamps. Alright, so here we go, 166.8 ohms, 0.9 ohms. Now let's go to a higher resistance. Alright, here we go. So 0.73 million ohms. I don't know if you can see that M right there, but that's million. So 0.73-ish million ohms. So 730,000 ohms. So with the auto ranging, it'll automatically go to the correct range. Now let's look at a manual ranging. so you can see how that acts differently. Now, so for that, just show you the ranges here. So you've got 200 up to 200 ohms. Let's see. Up to 200 ohms. Come on, focus. You've got up to 2,000 ohms, 20,000 ohms, 200,000 ohms, and 2 million ohms. So let's start with the setting at 200 ohms. We're going to measure that same resistor, that 167-ish ohm resistor. Alright, so we're getting 167.1 ohms. So if we didn't set the range correctly, and we went to that 750,000 ohm resistor, you'll see it just reads 1. So it's not able to read that. So we'll set it again. If you don't know your range that you need, you can always set to your highest available range. We'll set it to the 2 million. And we'll measure it. Alright, and then we get 0.732 million ohms. So, there we go. Another common test you'll do with the multimeter is checking for continuity. So for continuity, let's say you have an extension cord, you're not sure if it's good or not, we can test for that. So in this case, I'm going to use one clamp. We're going to test the ground circuit. So I'll connect that to the ground. And then on the other side, I'm going to use a probe, and we can then probe. Oh, here. There's also a continuity. It's a beep. It's got a little speaker thing. Lets you audibly determine if you have continuity. So we can do the same thing. There. Now I know I have continuity. We can go back through and we can check the resistance value. It's reading 0.4, 0.3 ohms. Something to consider if you're dealing with low ohm values is know the resistance of your leads. It's also a good way to check if the leads are good. So here I'm going to just touch the leads together, and I'm getting 0.3 ohms of resistance. 0.2. So I know if I'm dealing with, let's say I'm measuring a gen head, that I'm looking for 1.3 ohms. If it reads 1.5 or 1.6 ohms, I know I'm right on. Alright, now let's take a look at measuring amperage. So we're going to start with low amps, DC amps. We're going to take our multimeter. We're going to move our probe over to the fused 10 amp DC. The black will leave in the COM port. Then we're going to turn our selector to 10 amps DC. Now we've got our taillight here, our battery. We're going to hook up the ground side for the taillight, and we're going to provide it power through the multimeter on the positive side. So we'll connect to the battery, and then going through the multimeter to the taillight, we'll measure amps. Alright, so it looks like the running light side, we have 0.84 amps at 12 volts DC. And the brake light draws 2.1 amps DC. That's how you measure DC amps passing through the multimeter. You would do the same thing for AC. This one does not happen to measure AC amps, but most other multimeters will. This is a low-end multimeter. Alright, now we're going to use the clamp meter to measure AC amps. This particular clamp meter only does AC amps. Some will do AC and DC. We're going to be looking at AC in this. So I have a fairly low load here. Normally you'd be using a clamp meter with a larger load, say an electric motor. But for demonstration purposes, this will work just fine. So the first thing, you want to clamp around one of your hots. So here's neutral, here's hot. You could clamp around the neutral for 120 or the hot, but not both. If you clamp around both, it'll read 0. So we're going to clamp around the hot here. We're going to turn our selector to 200 amp AC. I'll plug it in. Alright, so you can see the bulb lit up, and we're reading 0.4 amps at 120 volts. This happens to be a 60 watt bulb. You can see if I go around the neutral, I get the same number, 0.4 amps. If I go around both, it'll read 0. So that's why you can't just clamp around your cord. You actually have to open up or jumper somehow so you can go around just one of the hot legs. Thanks for watching this video on the basics of multimeters. In the next video, we'll be doing some diagnostics and troubleshooting on generators. Thank you.